So we're trying our best. So everybody in this room is an insurance background person, from what I can see. So in all of our professional careers, I'm pretty sure that we've all heard the word, you learn insurance when you have a claim. And as insurance geeks and claims geeks, we do get high when we have an interesting claim. The ship owners don't necessarily share this view with us, but we do learn from claims. I am very happy today, and thank you very much to the owners and the P&I insurers of our vessel that was detained in the Ukraine and had subsequently become a success story and was released. And thank you very much, Vagia, thank you very much, and your principals for allowing us to present this to the audience, because I'm sure not everybody had the same result as you have, and we know that we've got 80 ships still stuck there. So releasing a vessel from the Ukraine, a success story. I would like to invite to the panel, please, Mrs. Vagia Skarpa, Legal Counsel of FGM Chartering, Mr. Haris Papaspyropoulos, Claims Director of NorthStandard, and Mr. Christos Georgiou, Chief Risk Officer of AANG Group, for us to have a discussion and share the story. Are the microphones? Yeah, they are. So, when the owners of the vessel entered into a voyage charter on the 16th of February 2022 to load coils from Odessa, they were oblivious to what was expecting them a week later. On the 22nd of February, the vessel arrived at port, commenced loading on the 23rd. The war broke on the early morning of the 24th February, and due to the intense military activity, loading operations were naturally suspended. At that point of time, I don't think there is a single person in the room that hasn't checked, do we have a ship in a Ukrainian port? Most of us did. On the 26th of February, with the military activity continuing, the master, in his reasonable judgment, considered that the vessel, her 19 crew members and her cargo were exposed to war risks as defined in the charter party, and their safety was at serious and imminent risk. Ukraine was in the meantime declared as a high-risk area, and owners found themselves literally a sitting duck in a war zone together with another 150 plus vessels. Stavros mentioned and said, we cannot predict the unpredictable. However, we can manage the unpredictable when it happens. So, question to Vagia, who were the people that woke up to the reality of we have a ship in the Ukraine. Vagia, what was the owner's initial reactions to those news, your initial approach, the first thoughts you made in the company, the environment in the company, how you, because I understand that some of the crew members were also family related to the owners. Most of the crew were repeat crew that you knew their families. So what was the first reaction in the office?
Believe it or not, it was okay. It could have been worse. Because at the time negotiating the charter party for that vessel, there were ongoing negotiations for another 4 vessels to call Ukraine. And for our fleet, Ukraine is, a common port of call. The situation between Ukraine and Russia has been going on for quite some time, but near that days, it was becoming more apparent that something is going wrong. So it was, some risk management was done in the sense that we had 2 vessels already that had departed a couple of days ago from Ukraine. And so the other 4 under negotiation were directed elsewhere. And the only one that the company decided to fix to Odessa was this one, the SILAC. We thought it would be lucky. And the oldest, the smallest, with the less of crew members amongst the fleet, and with the master relative to the owners and most loyal. And so that was the situation. So it could have been worse. And we now had to deal with it. The vessel was insured for additional war premium for the 7 days, which was quoted at ridiculous rates before the war, of course. All right, we were covered in that sense. We somehow knew that the war wasn't going to break out in all over Ukraine, so Odessa was considered at the beginning a safe place, let's say. And for some hours after declaration of the war, loading continued. And that was for a day or something. We thought and we asked the master, take your crew, take your vessel, and leave out of there. And they said, no, we will stay here, how it will all evolve. Loading wasn't allowed after some time, but then resumed. So in all these 7 days period,
there was a stop and kick off
exactly.
situation.
There was the feeling that, all right, maybe we can load and depart. That never happened. And after 2 days, 3, the loading operations were
Suspended completely.
exactly. And that left us there. The good thing was that the crew was handling very well the whole situation. We were constantly in contact with the crew, and throughout, for 6 months, was the opportunity not to focus to the master to be given through the embassy, and food, fresh water, bunkers. In that sense, they were all right. But most importantly, they kept in good spirit. I mean, and I only think at some point they only got tired. Not afraid, not at all. but tired at some point they got. And we had to do something. Okay. So the charter party was providing for notice to be given to the charters for them to nominate a safe port.
Yeah.
All right. That couldn't materialize because the Ukrainian authorities wouldn't allow any vessel to depart.
So they were using you as a shield. But if I may, if I may stop you there, because I need to bring in Christos into this now. Vagia has painted the canvas of waking up to the declaration of war in the office. From what you have said, Vagia, because my next question was going to be which were your priorities, and the priority was the welfare of the crew, which I believe had a lot to do with them keeping their spirits and them maintaining their position, them choosing not to leave as other crew members have done. And if they had left, they would have left owners also into a very difficult position than what you finally found yourselves in. So Christos, Stavros has been mentioning, has been talking about the 7 R's and the 4 T's. And it all looked very nice on, you know, on the screen and on a diagram. But this is a real scenario here. I mean, most of the situations, you are called in, you're given scenarios, or you can, you know, people try to think of the unthinkable and try to make a risk evaluation and see how they can transfer the risk and all that. Say you had this scenario that Vagia just described as a scenario, not a reality. How do you think, you know, that would have panned out in your graph, say, or in your paper to an owner?
Thank you, Anna. Of course, Stavros explained the textbook approach of risk management. Okay, as every risk manager, I have to work in line with the risk management policies and risk management methodologies and all this. And going back to the information provided also by Mr. Tsakiris, as a risk manager, I would have started assessing the war risk in Ukraine as soon as I have read the Lloyd's circular, and that was on the 21st of April 2021. Yeah. So at that point, I would have talked to my colleagues in the company and see what we do about this risk and what operations we have, how it's affecting our company with Ukraine, what business we have. So working through my risk matrix and everything that we use on a daily basis, I would have assessed together with my colleagues this risk. And for me at that point, it would have been a low likelihood risk, but the impact would have been severe. So having that in mind, in my view, this should be an information that should reach the board of the company to decide what do we do about this. Do we continue sending ships to Ukraine? And if yes, we have to follow it up maybe on a weekly basis and see what's going to happen next. And if everybody remembers right, as time was approaching towards the end of the year, personally in my mind, the risk was turning to be a critical one. And I would say that the question was not whether there would have been a war, something, an escalation, or I was sure that it will happen. So at that point, my suggestion to the board would be, because in risk management we suggest, we are not showstoppers, okay? So I would suggest that any activity with Ukrainian ports should have stopped. So that's how I would approach it.
As the owners have done, and they derouted and repositioned the other ships, and you managed to get them out of those scheduled voyages. And then, of course,
Correct.
The next thing, you call your P&I insurer.
We did.
So, Harris, when you got that call, which we have to put a parenthesis here, because all three of us have been involved in that equation, this was just 2 days after entering
The club.
your club, and they became members, and it was a new relationship.
That's true.
So, Harimu, when you received that call from Vagia, thoughts racing through your mind, priorities. Stephen earlier emphasized more than once the importance of the insurer being able to respond and protect the members. So, to what extent, I mean, how did you, as a club, how did you react to this? I'm not sure whether you had other members that had vessels in the Ukraine and all that, but in this particular instance, let's hear your view, your initial reactions.
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity, and Adonis, and thank you all for the attendance this morning. It's really nice to see familiar people in the audience. Yes, it was, I think the outbreak took place on Thursday, on the 24th of February, and I received a call on Saturday afternoon from Vagia. It was the first time...
It's supposed to be like that on a Saturday.
It was the first time that I was talking someone from the new member. They became member a few days ago. So after the introductions, in a very nice atmosphere, Vagia told me that we have a vessel which is trapped in Odessa, the sea luck, which obviously ran out of luck that day. So we had, the initial approach was a bit to evaluate the situation and see how we can assist and support the member, because this is what we do. So the first approach was definitely to forget our legal background, because at least for my generations, but I believe for many other generations, that was the first war of a significant situation. So we thought that the legal actions should not be a priority. So the first thing was definitely to assess the risks. We had a vessel in a war risk area. We had the crew on board, which for us is definitely a priority. We had a cargo of steel coils, and the cargo operation, if I remember correctly, was almost about to be completed. So the cargo, it was a significant quantity of cargo on board. And on the second approach was to try to gather information. We were very lucky because all the correspondents, despite the difficulties, supported us and all the other clubs. And I need to say big thanks to these people, because under very difficult personal situations, sometimes it was really awkward for us to go and ask maybe quite silly questions. Their lives were at risk, and we were asking about logistical issues, and at the same time try to collect as much information we could about the parties, like the shippers, who are the charterers, the experience of the local people dealing with these people. And from a practical point of view, if it was possible, by taking the necessary actions for the vessel to sail, which after a few days we realized that this was not possible, not only because of restrictions and dangerous, navigational dangers at the open sea, but also you couldn't find stevedores, we couldn't find pilots, tags, nothing. So quite soon, we realized that there was no chance for the vessel to sail anytime soon. But I remember on that Saturday, the owner sent the first notice under the Vogia Charter Party. The demurrage, because it was a run situation, we couldn't earn any demurrages. So it was really important for us to gather all informations, to review them and try to see what was the best scenario, what was the best case to assist the member and speed up the process of the vessel's release.
Vagia, you mentioned that you had those first 7 days. Obviously, you were fully insured, you had full insurances in place. You had that first week or maybe second week of, yes, we offer the additional war cover, but it was at some extraordinarily high levels.
Only 7%.
Only 7%, which was translated into some maybe 500,000. So what happens when you've got to take a decision of, I can transfer my risk to my insurer, and the line where it becomes unaffordable, or when you actually realize that I have paid the full value of the ship in additional war premiums. And then it stops. They stopped offering it, correct, at some point?
Correct. It was exactly like that. A decision to be made to either pay. You cannot estimate how many times the value of the vessel to the insurers, because it had become apparent that the vessel wouldn't sail from Odessa, or to give it some time to the markets to come to their senses and evaluate better the situation as it evolves, because the good thing in this case was that Odessa has still kept a safe place, and this after two weeks the premium rate was 1%, so it became more sensible. So we obtained additional war premium insurance for another 7 days, no more, maybe more, was offered at that time. But it wasn't for the owners. It was never the value of the vessel the main concern. The main concern was the safety of the crew. And as long as we were receiving information from them that the situation is calm around the port and that they are handling it well, we couldn't do anything else than wait to see how it all evolves.
And how things would develop.
Yeah, given that we could provide them with all supplies necessary, and it was up to them to decide whether they wanted to
leave or stay.
Or stay. And they all decided that they were going to stay.
Amazing. Amazing. So I believe it was Grigoris that mentioned earlier that at the end of the day, it's all down to the ship owner. And at the end of the day, no matter how many insurance covers you have, it is down to the ship owner with the support of your insurers, of course, in the background. But the final decisions are yours. And of course, Harry, you had to advise between reality, legality, practicality. What were the legal issues in this case that you and owners, Vagia actually, have been going through and debating and looking at in terms of, yes, you're a sitting duck there, you can't go anywhere at the moment, but proactively, what were the legalities that you had in mind and the steps that you took together to protect owners' interest should the possibility ever arise of the ship sailing?
We sent the notice under the war clause, but we realized, as I mentioned before, that there was no chance for the vessel to sail anytime soon. So the approach was to wait and see, and the legal aspect came when the Crane Initiative started on July. So up to that stage, the owners had decided not even to instruct lawyers, and in my view, that was a very wise decision because they made it clear from the very beginning that their approach was very commercially. They knew that they're gonna lose money. It is a war situation. And from the experience that we have seen from other owners where they had commenced legal proceedings, they managed only to create a very bad relationship between the involved parties. And I think it is worthy to mention that on the 24th of February, in an article I read in Trade Winds, around 94 vessels were trapped in Ukrainian ports. And with the crane initiative, when the owners managed to sail the vessel from there, there were another 85 vessels, and if I understand correctly, at the moment there are 80 vessels which have been declared constructive total loss. So I think it was a good approach. The members acted very professionally without trying to make money. They just wanted their vessel to sail with a crew.
I want to say something on this point. These emergencies, unlucky situations, okay, they happen. But we had a plan. The company had a plan. The plan was that this voyage was one of the last voyages of the vessel, which was going to be sold and replaced with a new one. So this unfortunate situation with the war was keeping us from our plans, in a sense. Okay, the crew was safe. The loss of this freight wasn't the issue. It couldn't be considered earned in any case. The charterers couldn't blame them up to the beginning of the crane initiative. And so, yeah, we couldn't win all. The priority was to continue.
Mitigate the losses,
Exactly.
manage the situation, and deal with the disruption of the company's plans. And it brings me back to Christos. We have a ship that is sitting there now for months. The war isn't going to stop. The owners have explored all the avenues of trying to release the ship, obviously beyond their hands, beyond everybody's control. Vagia mentioned the disruption of the business operation. Let's not consider the earnings, but what about the future plans? Yet, even though, Vagia, it actually strikes me, even though you had plans to sell the ship in your older ship, you took the position, we do not want. You had the option to get the crew out of there if they wanted to leave or if you had taken the decision. And yet, owners took the position that we are not going to let our ship become a CTL. We want to get our ship out. You have an owner here, Christos, that has all the risk transfer mechanisms in place and yet takes the commercial approach and the approach of, I'm not going to abuse my insurance cover, even though I have plans to sell the ship. And they're taking this approach. I mean, from now, coming back to how they reacted to it as a risk manager, what's your view on the whole thing?
Of course, that's why we are here. We are talking about a success story, and the success is coming from the cooperation of all parties and all the steps taken from everyone were towards having a successful result. So before I talked about identifying the risk and what we could do to either reduce the risk and in the end by deciding not to send any ships to Ukraine to avoid the risk. And something that Vagia already talked about before. And at the time the ship is stranded in Odessa, we are talking about the actual risk happening and what do we do to get the ship out or to minimize the impact of what happened. And the risks, of course, they had to deal as a company and with the insurers were the legal risks, the health and safety of the staff, maybe reputational risks, and all these were handled in a very successful manner.
So basically the risk had changed.
Yes, the risk.
It evolved, it changed
evolved,
with the
yes.
constant
You don't
monitoring.
stop. You don't stop
Evaluating.
Evaluating, yes.
So the corridor then is agreed, and it presents the first opportunity for the ship to sail, yet we're still loaded with the coils. How did you then deal with that one? Harry, Vagia, can both share.
When was agreed? July?
It was at the end of July, the grain corridor, which was agreed between the parties, yeah.
Okay, even before it was agreed officially, when there were these, news that it was going to be agreed, we would first send a chaser to the charters and then make coffee every day. We were going to the office. It was constant emails, phone calls, texts, us requesting charters to arrange discharge of the cargo on board and cancellation of the charter party, basically. The owner had made very clear throughout all these discussions that we will drop hands. Each party bears their losses and wish them, because there were Ukrainian charters, all the best, but we want our vessel out of the port of Odessa. They weren't very understanding. They came up with technicalities that I don't know whether they were true or not, but it was up to the port authorities to allow discharging. Then the port authorities needed confirmation from the charters to allow discharging, and it was all going on like that. No, it's not us, it's the port authorities. No, it's not the port authorities, it's the charters, for July until beginning of August.
So Harry, from your point of view, obviously at that point you mentioned owners appointed lawyers at that part because it was really getting out of the charter party, as Vagia said. Yeah. Do you, I believe if I recall correctly, last week when we were talking about it, you also mentioned that perhaps there was a hidden agenda on the charter's part. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit more on those legalities and how it kind of all rolled up.
Sure, yeah. First of all, the members were experiencing very difficult problems to communicate with these people because they were dealing with an Ukrainian charterer. Some of them, they flew out of Ukraine. So the communication was problematic. Even we were receiving quite conflicting information. They were telling us that they cannot discharge the steel coils because the title has already passed to receivers in Romania. We knew from our homework that the shippers and the charterers were affiliated companies, but also the receivers. So we're telling them that, you are the same company, please communicate, do whatever you want, we need to release the vessel.
Terminal administrator as well, part of the group.
Yes,
part of the...
true, yeah. And also they were telling us that obviously they were using the vessel as a floating storage. They were telling us that if they will discharge the cargo, they're going to lose their war risk cover. Of course, we never managed to double-check this kind of information. But also the other important point was how under these circumstances could convince the charters to let us go. We also asked the authorities if we could change a little bit the coils and load cranes in some of the vessels' holds, but they were saying us that this is a no, it's not in line with the crane initiative. So at this point, we decided, together with the members, to instruct solicitors to stay for some time behind, but also a counsel in order to give us some ideas of what kind of leverage we could use to the charterers in order to discharge the cargo. As Vagia said, for technical issues, the terminal was only willing to do something when the shippers or the charterers would have made the decision. They couldn't discharge the cargo. It was also a custom issue. So the problems were quite a few at that point. But I think that also we approached the PNI club of the charterers. They had an entry with an IG club, so with the assistance of our local colleagues, we managed to identify the handler. So we start discussing the case directly that August with their PNI club.
Do you feel that shifting the communications from the charterers directly to their insurers had actually played a key role in the outcome in the end?
I think it's a combination, Anna. You know, you can never be certain what was the one which triggered the good outcome. I think it's a combination of actions, of hard efforts, patience by the member. So it may help, but I cannot say that for certain. I think that also we appointed the solicitors on the right time, so we say to the charterers that we have the legal means, and also we knew that they had some assets, so they may also be afraid that if we could take a decision by a foreign court, in this case we were advised that we could take an injunction by the High Court, they may afraid that we could enforce this decision in the countries that we had managed to find assets.
We had direct communications with the person responsible for the charters. And when there was finally the chance for vessels to get out from the war zone, their argumentation about not being able to discharge the steel cargo or losing war insurance for the cargo. The owner's argument was, all right, your charters are caring for the risk of some tons, thousands of tons of steel cargo, but we have 18 people on board. And you cannot compare the two. Even if the owners offered the charters at their cost, at owner's cost, the cargo to be discharged and to deal with all technicalities, logistics, but we couldn't get them to agree. And we had to react. Somehow they could believe owners were serious. And that was by appointing solicitors and making the issue public, because that in the core of it, it was that exactly. The steel cargo or the 19 people on board that they're given the chance to leave. They have lived on the vessel for 6 months without complaining. We had to get them out of there. And that was the most important for the owners.
Actually, that is a very interesting nobody can argue back on that argument. The cargo, perishable, insured,
I think
replaced. Yes, the crew members were insured, but there's no value to life. There is a value to cargo, and it can be paid. And I'm sure Ileana now is picking up a point to discuss later on this one. But that is actually that's a very, very.
I'm saying it because I honestly believe that made the difference to them as well, to the charters, I mean. And but they had to be given the idea that, all right, we are sensitive, but not that sensitive. We have appointed lawyers, and since now there is the possibility for the vessel to sail, you have to do what you have to do. And otherwise, you're responsible for losses.
This was a very crucial point, because we got an advice from a counsel that when you request something, you need to get a reaction. Otherwise, the party who doesn't react may be exposed to consequential losses. So I think that was the main legal leverage that we used during the final course of the negotiations.
And of course, you had at the time, you were not aware, or none of us were aware, whether the corridor would be renewed, so you were under time pressure as well to make it within those 120 days. And you did make it, so finally you discharged, and you loaded grain, and you sailed. How did that feel?
We were promised that okay, up to a point, it got personal for me and for the operations department and for Harris. I'm sure they have to agree. The charters, we have to have their agreement. No, we can't lose this opportunity. And the news came on a weekend that eventually the vessel sailed, and it was a different Monday back to the office.
A nice way of putting
a happy
it.
one.
A nice way of putting it. A good Monday.
And we had a big party a week after or something to celebrate for everybody's efforts in the office.
It's always nice to have a happy ending, and it's good to have a success story. Guys, thank you so much for sharing with us and for giving us. We didn't have you in Cyprus with us, unfortunately. There was so much that Harry and I could do in your shoes, and it's nice to have your angle of things.
And as a final point, we need to mention that the previous time that the members had fixed a vessel with that particular charterer, there was a crisis in Crimea. So
right.
For the sake of humanity, you should never fix a vessel with that charter.
Yes.
Or it's a good thing that the SELAC has been sold.
It is correct, and I wanted to say it in the context of risk assessment. We had this experience with the same charter back at 2015, when the charter party was cancelled due to the crisis at the Crimea. And sometimes, you have an experience and you say, okay, it can't happen again. Or we thought it that way. Yeah. What are the odds? Cannot happen again. But it did. Next time, if we start negotiations, we let everybody know, be prepared. Yeah. And
Jinx is back.
Yeah, and with this opportunity, I want to thank Harris personally and the club, because they never considered this a lost case, and that was the most important for me, handling this from owners.
Believing in happy endings.
The cooperation is the key point. Even though it was a new relationship, we trust each other, and I think the outcome relates to the good cooperation. and the members' patience, of course.
Most important. A takeaway from this. Again, guys, thank you very much. Christos, Harris, Vagia, thank you for being here and sharing. Adonis is already pointing at me that we are going a bit late. If you have any questions, we can address them later at the closing. We've mentioned the corridor and how that came as that was a hope for a lot of the ships that were stuck in the Ukrainian ports. Unfortunately, Fred Kinney had to dash off to Rome for a very important UN agreement and negotiation. But we have been allowed by the IMO to present the video of his presentation on how the Ukraine corridor has been orchestrated, how it has been negotiated, the difficulties and the challenges beyond that. So, ladies and gentlemen, on video, albeit on video, Frederick Kenny, Head of Legal and External Affairs of the IMO. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ.